When was the first you took?
About 1.5 years ago, Lynn Jansen, a Japanese language tutor, took the first group of high school students from the Hunter to Newcastle's sister city in Japan, Ube. Since then, there have been several exchange visits. Already this group of Japanese visitors, representing high schools in and around Ube, has travelled to Scone and the Central Coast. And today, they had a chance to see what the Tokal Ag College has to offer.
I think they're slightly intimidated by the size of the animals close up, and I know some of them haven't seen cows and sheep at close quarters, but they've been captivated by our native animals, and yeah, it's all a great experience for them.
The Lower Hunter Civic Design Awards are divided into 5 categories. Last year, the residential section was shared between this Housing Commission block of flats in Gordon Avenue, Hamilton, and the Snell family residence in Merriweather. Both of the projects were the work of the Snell firm of architects. Last year, the awards were expanded to include Maitland and Port Stephens Shires, and 47 entries were received. The 5 categories are for non-residential development, residential development, smaller scale non-residential, smaller scale residential, and a Heritage Award for the development of a building of historical significance. Entries will be judged by a board, including representatives from the Royal Australian Institute of Architects and the Australian Institute of Landscape Artists.
We'll be looking at the quality of the architecture, the way it fits in with its environment, whether it's in keeping with the buildings around it, the standard of building, workmanship, and the overall quality that it creates for the people who are using it.
Professor Maitland says the award can only help architecture in the Hunter.
A good design always needs recognition and encouragement, and the architects in the region look to this award as being the one that really focuses on design in the Lower Hunter.
It was last Thursday at a meeting with unions in Brisbane that the Australian Coal Association put forward its 11-point deregulation plan for the ailing coal industry. And last night, mining unions responded to the plan, saying they totally rejected it. John Maitland, president of the Miners' Federation, says the deregulation strategy will just lead to a greater oversupply. He says it's the wrong direction for the industry and the unions just won't wear it. But the outlook foreshadowed by him is very bleak indeed. He says the 1-month moratorium in the industry has been wasted, and that when it finishes at the end of the month, there'll be massive retrenchments. He predicts that miners will converge on Canberra and didn't rule out a national strike in the industry. About 200 members of the Metal Trades Industry Association gathered at City Hall last night for the organisation's annual dinner. Guest speaker was Bruce Thompson, the Director and Chief Executive of Coal and Allied and the immediate past Chairman of the Australian Coal Association. On the issue of deregulation, Mr Thompson urged caution. It appears that he's voicing a very different view to that of the Coal Association, which wants the industry to immediately push further down the deregulatory track.
My personal view would be that as far as coal pricing is concerned, that we should stay in the position we're currently in for a little while longer. We should measure our steps very carefully in the present market climate.
So that partially regulated?
I think the situation that exists now, and this is a personal view, not a coal industry view, but I think the situation that exists now with the Minister having reserve powers to not approve prices if he believes they're not in the national interest is quite a sensible one.
Mr Thompson is adamant that the industry's outlook should not be all doom and gloom.
Our coal reserves, compared to a number of other companies, are relatively easily mined. They're close to the coast. We've got good established infrastructure here in the Hunter Valley. We have a lot going for us. What we've got to do is, in the way in which we work, is refine our productive techniques. We've got to be more productive than we currently are. From the management side, we've got to refine the way in which we manage our operations. There is no reason why we can't be just as competitive as some of the nations against whom we compete.
This is the set design for La Bohème, one of the grandest operas of them all, and it's going to be performed here in Newcastle in December. Combining local talent with the best in Australian opera, the production is backed by Shoeys as one of their bicentennial projects.
For all the news,
join us tonight
at 6.
Hello, I'm Jane Button. Tonight I'll be reporting on the effects of the rain in the Hunter Valley. Although graziers seem pleased with the wet weather, it's playing havoc with the crops of vegetable farmers.
For all the news,
join us tonight
at 6.
Workers at the Carrington silos are covered by two unions, the Australian Workers' Union and the Public Service Association. The AWU today arrived at a proposition in the State Industrial Commission before Justice Sweeney, which could see continuous running introduced. Of the 131 men employed at the grain terminal, about 77 belong to the AWU. They will meet tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock to vote on the delegates' recommendations. Manager of the Grain Handling Authority, Vince Graham, says that if the AWU members vote to return to work under the agreed conditions, they will be put back on the payroll. However, he says the plant cannot be started up again without the second union back on the site. The Public Service Association failed to agree with today's propositions and will argue its separate case about health and safety before Justice Sweeney on Thursday. Peter Barrick from Trades Hall said today that the men at the Newcastle terminal had agreed to abide by the umpire's decision. But the whole dispute has angered farmers. The New South Wales Farmers Association says that strikers at the terminal should be replaced by people who are prepared to work. President Michael Tooth says it's the Grain Handling Authority's responsibility to run the terminal efficiently and that cost cutting is in accord with those responsibilities. During the dispute, some 150,000 tonnes have been road hauled to Queensland. This has meant a loss of $4.5 million to the state's rail system and $270,000 to the Maritime Services Board.
This is John Church reporting. More than half the workforce at the Newcastle grain terminal moved to accept continuous running today. But it looks like the Public Service Association is digging in its heels. We explain why tonight. For all the news, join us tonight at 6.
Good afternoon, I'm Helen Hughes. In tonight's news, a report on Deafness Awareness Week. We'll take a look at some of the equipment available to hearing impaired people, like this new telephone, and we'll look at some of the barriers that still need to be broken.
For all the news,
join us tonight
at 6.
angry residents at West Wallsend and Seahampton say they will find a way to stop the construction of the western option of the F3 freeway from Wakefield to Minmay. Despite assurances from the Federal Minister for Land Transport, Peter Duncan, the residents say the freeway will come too close to their homes.
For all the news,
Join us tonight
at 6.
Good afternoon, I'm Helen Hughes. In tonight's news, a report on an internationally acclaimed artist based at Port Stephens. We'll take a look at a series of works he's painted especially for next year's bicentennial celebrations.
For all the news,
Join us tonight
at 6.
It may be surprising that despite all the talk of gloom, coal tonnages through the port of Newcastle are up. So much so, 900,000 tonnes above budget, that both the Kooragang coal loader and the Port Waratah Company have announced a reduction in the handling charge to operate from October the 1st. The cost per tonne will drop 30 cents back to the April 1986 price of $4.98. According to Dennis Stone, manager of Kooragang, this is not largesse, but a response to containment of costs and increased throughput.
So it would have happened anyway, even if the industry hadn't have been in such strife.
Yes, except that we're not quite sure of the next 6 months, and we may not have done it just now had the industry not been in the dire straits it's in.
So you've gone back to a charge, that existed 18 months ago. So
Yes,
presumably the coal loaders themselves are in pretty good shape.
We are doing very well, thank you, yes. Tonnage, despite the problems, is up, and therefore we're able to give the relief to the industry that it requires at the moment.
Mr Stone emphasised that should tonnages drop off, he has a business to run and the charge would rise again. The manager of Port Waratah Coal Services, David Boyd, was less direct.
When the reason for cutting the charges at this stage is to help competitiveness, and one would hope that that will help growth in tonnage rather than dropping.
But if the tonnage did drop, you would have to increase your charge?
Well, it's not to say we'd have to, but the result of the equation would probably mean it would happen, yes.
Both managers said that if a national stoppage does eventuate, they would both be able to continue operating next week on available stocks, and in the case of Kooragang, even into the week beyond that.
Police say the man walked into the all-night BP service station in Maitland Road, Mayfield, at about 5 o'clock. With a white scarf covering his face, the bandit approached the lone attendant, pointed the loaded spear gun at him and said, "You're dead meat." Police say a customer drove in and the bandit fled on foot. 45 minutes later, a man answering the same description entered the BP service station in Sandgate Road, Shortland. Police allege he placed a loaded spear gun at the back of the attendant's head and demanded money from the till. After getting the money, the attendant deliberately dropped it, and while the bandit was picking it up, he escaped. Police believe the bandit departed in an HQ Holden station wagon, tan in colour with a white roof. They are searching for a 28-year-old male of medium build, with black hair, dark eyes, dark complexion, who was wearing an army overcoat and slouch hat. They are also searching for the driver of the car.
The 28-year-old Mark became a paraplegic after a motorcycle accident 10 years ago. For the past 6 years, he has owned and operated the Argenton Health Centre. He took up racing this time last year and drives a standard VK Commodore V8 in the Yokohama Commodore Classic Series. Mark is able to drive and compete with the aid of a special hand-operated device which takes over the foot controls. Pushing the handle across applies the brakes, while pulling it down works the accelerator. He says he's not disadvantaged by it, and even Alan Grice liked the device.
He got in and tried the hand controls, and he felt there was more feel through the brake with the hand there was through the foot, and he said, you know, as a joke he'd be considering putting some in his race car.
In the 4 heats of the Commodore Series so far this year, Mark hasn't won any, although he has finished each one and not in last place. This weekend, after some fine-tuning of the car, Mark says he could finish as high as the top 5. In the long term with his racing, he has big plans.
Well, I'd like to go as far as I possibly can, you know, and hopefully race and win Bathurst one day.
Earlier this month, the Liberals held their campaign launch rehearsal with all the pizzazz of the real thing. According to the Liberals, all went off well and they're ready and waiting for the election date announcement from Premier Unsworth.
The more Barry Unsworth says it's going to be late, and that means after March next year, the shorter the odds are for October or December this year, in my view. I don't know. We're ready now, we'll be ready whenever it's held.
Mr Greiner says he's in favour of a fixed 4-year term in state government. He says that if that was the case, the election would be held in March. Now Mr Greiner is working up to a mock election date of September 12th, and he says by the end of this trial run, his party will be prepared for the next poll.
Well, what we're seeking to ensure is that the planning, the logistics, the organisation of the Liberal Party campaign at the next state election is as close to being perfect as it can be. We don't want to have some of the problems that beset the recent federal election campaign. We think we've got an excellent chance of winning the election. We're going to make sure that that doesn't get undermined by lack of preparedness on our part.
The Falcons weren't expected to be in the same class as Perth. On Friday night, the Wildcats had an untroubled win over the Sydney Supersonics and were expected to do the same to Newcastle last night. However, Newcastle played inspired basketball, going to a 14-point lead at half-time. Perth fought back to within 2 points at three-quarter time, but the Falcons skinned the Cats in the final session to win 131 to 112. Best for Newcastle were Wayne McDaniel with 39 points and 13 rebounds, and Jerry Everett with 37 points.
Oh yeah, bit of the Harlem Globetrotters stuff. I'll go through there, round you, get and the ball in for two. Oh yeah, Jerry Everett's ripped them apart tonight.
For Perth, James Crawford scored 45 points and Tiny Pinder 34 before he was fouled off. Last night's win over the number 4 team in the competition was Newcastle's second on end and 5th this year. The Falcons' next game is in Melbourne against North Melbourne Friday week. South Newcastle, looking for their first premiership since 1976, drew first blood after a kick from John Crook.
Ball deflected off the Lakes player. Walters comes over quickly. There's a loose ball. Wade will pick up the ball. Will it be a try? It's a try. Referee Gustard says yes.
Paul Waite converted and South were leading 6-0. Midway through the first half, Lake centre Paul Harrigan scored after he was slipped a beautiful pass from Mike McKiernan. Captain coach Peter Walsh converted and the game was tied up 6-all. Only 5 minutes later, Lakes were in again through winger Lindsay Bowen, and Lakes looked on their way to a hat-trick of premierships. With only 10 minutes left to half-time, South were awarded a penalty try. Waite converted and the Lions led 12-10. Lake scored 2 points from a penalty and the half-time score was 12-all. In the second half, Lakes went to a 2-point advantage following a penalty goal. Ashley Gordon then set up the best no-try of the day.
Gordon picked it up from nothing. Here's Ashley Gordon. Let's see the ability of this bloke. Botham's run round him. Botham's missed him. Gordon got it back into Robinson. Robinson into Hosen. That's a great try, South.
He's out.
That's a
Touch
great
judge.
try. Out. Touch judge. Flag in the air. No try.
5 minutes later, and Robert McCluskey puts up the bomb, Walters drops it, and Panawit scores for South to put them in front 16-14. That was to be the end for South. Botham scored a try after bouncing off the goal posts, and then Steve Walters scores after some great individual play. So for the third year in a row, the Lakes United Seagulls have taken out the Newcastle Premiership, and for the second year in a row, South have been bridesmaids.
Ever since our ancestors came to Australia, people have been collecting china, and Royal Dalton has always been avidly sought, with everything from dinner sets to figurines and Bunnykins plates appearing in collectors' cabinets. Today, Michael Dalton, a direct descendant of the company's founder and its roving ambassador, was in Newcastle launching Royal Dalton's bicentennial range. Tonight, he'll present Lord Mayor John McNaughton with this special Royal Dalton figurine of Captain Cook in honour of the forthcoming bicentennial celebrations. According to Michael Dalton, there is an extraordinary collection of Royal Dalton in Australia, housed in museums as well as in private homes.
Collecting in Australia is very strong, not just in Royal Dalton. People collect the most extraordinary things over here. Royal Dalton has, I think, always been collected by, you know, I go to country places and people bring in lots of old pieces, you know, that they've had in their house. And I think just about every old house in Australia has got an old piece of Royal Dalton somewhere or other.